What happens when a prince, accustomed to deference, walks into a studio expecting admiration, only to face a host who refuses to bow? On a night that would become Bravo legend, Prince Harry arrived at Watch What Happens Live believing he held all the cards. He was prepared for the gentle, celebrity-friendly banter the show was known for. But Andy Cohen, the master of his own intimate, neon-lit kingdom, had other plans entirely. What began as casual chatter soon spiraled into one of the most explosive interviews in television history. The Bravo clubhouse glowed like a lacquered jewel box. Rows of bottles were backlit in a vibrant neon grid, and the famous WWHL sign winked with mischief from the exposed brick wall. Andy Cohen stood at the center of it all, shuffling his note cards with a leisurely precision, a cocktail balanced like punctuation in his other hand. The band's stinger popped, the audience hooped on cue, and the cameras slid in for the warm, open kiss of the lens. "Good evening," Andy purred into the camera, his grin dialed to its familiar setting of charming trouble. "Tonight, we have a very special guest. A man who has lived more headlines than most of us have had hangovers. Please welcome Prince Harry." The applause that greeted him was not stadium thunder, but it wasn't tepid either. It was something in between, curious, almost clinical. Harry strode out in a sleek midnight blue jacket and no tie, sporting that practiced casual yet royal vibe. He shook Andy's hand like a formality he'd outgrown, flashed a minimalist smile to the room, and slid into the guest chair with the relaxed ease of an athlete and the unspoken entitlement of a CEO. "Great to have you here," Andy said, opening with the standard pleasantry. "Of course it is," Harry replied, smooth as a glass tabletop. "I don't do small shows." A few audience members laughed nervously, unsure if they were supposed to. Andy's eyebrow did a little Charleston of amusement. "Well, welcome to small show, big trouble," he said, a wink tucked neatly inside the words. "Let's ease in. How's California treating you?" Harry folded his hands on the desk, examining the set as if it might blink first. "California's fine. We don't really get treated, we build. People misunderstand that. They project. We create. It's not the same thing." "Project how?" Andy asked, giving a casual rotation of his wrist to keep the condensation from his drink from dripping. "They project their empty weekends and call them opinions," Harry said. His smile was all polished enamel, with no real heat behind it. "It's understandable." "Understood," Andy said lightly. "Though our weekends here are very booked, I assure you." The audience chuckled, relaxing slightly. "Okay, life, work, purpose. Let's talk projects. You've been busy. Documentaries, media ventures. Some say there's a difference between telling your story and monetizing it. Where do you land?" Harry's eyes hardened by a single, noticeable degree. "There's a difference between monetizing a story and reclaiming one. People who never had to fight to be heard often confuse the two. So the Netflix deal, and the memoir." Andy began. Harry continued, his tone even. "That's reclaiming. The sit-downs, the podcasts, the new series in development, all reclaiming. Obviously." He delivered the word like a stamped passport, final and unquestionable. "If you've ever had your life distorted by powerful institutions, you'd understand. Institutions like the media, the monarchy," Andy said, letting the last word dangle in the air like a shiny ornament catching the light. Harry's stare flickered, quicksilver. "Institutions that operate on extraction. Some wear crowns. Some wear credentials." "Fair," Andy conceded. "Though, speaking of crowns, you were born into one. There's a certain awkwardness when royalty criticizes royalty. It's like a chef slamming kitchens while still demanding a table at the best restaurant." Harry chuckled, but there was no mirth in it. "Cute analogy. I left the kitchen. Now everyone's mad I won't keep cooking their favorite dish. Let's plate something simple, then," Andy said, glancing down at a card. Family. How are things with your father? There was a subtle pause, not from fear but from clear calculation. I don't run my life on press schedules or patriarchal calendars, Harry stated. If reconciliation happens, it happens in private, not because a talk show wants a ratings bump. The room went quiet enough to hear the ice softly surrender in Andy's glass. We're not opposed to bumps, Andy said, still smiling. But we do prefer answers. Is there contact? A call? A text message? Harry tilted his head, a condescending gesture. When contact becomes content, that's when you lose the plot. On this show, Andy replied smoothly, we try not to lose the plot. He turned a card over. Let's talk about your book. A ripple of anticipation went through the audience. Harry's jaw tensed. Just once, an almost imperceptible flare of his nostril, then reset to neutral. A lot of people loved it, Andy continued. Others felt it was a bit sprawling. That some chapters played like settling old scores. Do you think anything in there went too far? If your life has been curated by strangers, Harry said, his voice velvet on the surface but granite underneath, there's no such thing as too far. There's only, finally. Even the passages about your brother? Your sister-in-law? Some called those sections particularly harsh. Surgical, Harry corrected without missing a beat. If it doesn't cut, it's just PR. Andy's smile widened a calculated millimeter. Speaking of PR, your ventures here have serious scale. Production companies, non-profit work, investments with big partners. There's a perception that you left public duty for private equity, that you swapped duty for deals. Harsh or accurate? Harry leaned back in his chair, looking loose and imperious all at once. Anyone still using duty as a virtue signal is living in a sepia-toned photograph. Impact doesn't require a marching band or a balcony. It requires leverage. And I'm using mine. Leverage is expensive, Andy noted. And very visible. How do you square that with all your talk about wanting privacy? Harry's reply came polished and immediate. Privacy isn't secrecy. It's agency. People who've never been hunted don't know the difference. Some would counter, Andy said gently, that the hunting seems to pick up whenever there's a new series to promote, a new interview, a new reveal. Some would counter anything, Harry snapped, and the sharp edge finally showed in his voice. If I breathe, someone writes an essay about my oxygen. The audience's laughter arrived a beat late, half sincere and half squirm. Andy nodded, letting a breath pass between them. All right, he said, shifting gears. Let's try something a little more neutral. How's married life? Harry offered a thin, practiced smile. Sustained. Intentional. Intelligent. Sounds like a brand deck, Andy said amiably. Look, there are rumors. Talk of distance, different priorities, career pressures. Anything you want to dismiss or confirm tonight? I don't do rumor management, Harry replied coolly. If people need a story to tuck themselves in at night, I'm not their bedtime narrator. The audience murmured, the sound forming a clear question mark in the air. Andy held the moment, letting the tension build. Okay, he said softly. If not a rumor, then a principle. What's the one thing you and Meghan promised each other after leaving the UK? Harry considered this, then shrugged. Never to be small again. Small how? Andy pressed. Small enough to be convenient to anyone else's narrative, Harry said. Small enough to fit inside a picture frame they own. Right. Andy set his card aside entirely. Last layup before we get spicy. Looking back, if you could redo one thing about the exit, the interviews, the slow drip of revelations, what would you change? Harry smiled, and for the first time, it was a smile that showed real teeth. I'd have talked less slowly. People mistake patience for permission. A low whoa rolled through the bleachers. Andy breathed in, let the silence in the room turn crystalline. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving Harry's face. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's get spicy." He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it. The entire audience leaned forward as one. The camera crept in closer, hungry for what was coming. "You've said you wanted a normal life," Andy began. "But nothing about this is normal. You've sued, you've spoken, you've sold. You said you were done with the institution, and then you built one of your own with better lighting. Is there any part of you that worries you might have become the very thing you claim to hate?" Harry's smile vanished. For one beat, the polished mask slid away, revealing not panic, but pure disdain. "You misunderstand scale for hypocrisy," he said. "I set my own stage. That's the entire point." "Even if that stage," Andy asked, "needs constant conflict to sell tickets?" "Conflict finds me," Harry snapped. "Ask the tabloids you probably read before breakfast." "I read my cards," Andy said, lifting them up. "And I read the room." He let the pointed comment hang in the air. "We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk specifics. Timeline contradictions, charity dollars, security arrangements. What the palace says versus what you wrote. No fairy tales, just details." Harry's gaze chilled. "Details can be arranged to tell any story you want, Andy. That's your gift. And that's your business," Andy answered, with a wink that held no humor. "Stick around." The band hit the bumper music. The studio lights softened. The applause sign flashed, and the audience clapped, but it sounded odd and hollow, like rain hitting glass. Harry adjusted his cuff and looked toward the rafters as if they held a better class of question. Andy simply twirled the ice in his glass and let it settle. He didn't look at Harry. Instead, he looked directly into the camera lens, at the little red tally light that meant millions would be leaning closer when they returned. During the break, the set hummed with a choreographed calm, stage managers whispering, makeup artists darting in for a quick dab, grips gliding equipment into place. Harry leaned toward his handler for a brief, intense second. The handler nodded too quickly. When Harry sat back, he wore a new smile, taut as a bowstring. 10 seconds to live, a producer called out. Andy placed his cards down, untouched. He didn't need them anymore. 5, 4, 3. "Welcome back," Andy said, his voice warm as velvet but his eyes sharp as broken glass. "Let's pick up where we left off." He turned to Harry, not unkindly, but unblinking. "Let's talk truth." The applause faded completely. Andy Cohen leaned forward, cocktail in hand, his eyes calm but sharp. "So, Harry," he began, "you've spoken often about your truth. But let's talk about the facts. In your book, some stories, well, didn't quite match official records. Why should people believe your version?" Harry smirked. "Because I was there. Unlike the institutions that rewrite history to protect themselves." Andy nodded slowly. "Fair point. But the Archbishop of Canterbury himself corrected your claim about being married 3 days before the official ceremony. Doesn't that look a little misleading?" Harry's smile tightened. "A marriage is about vows, Andy, not paperwork. Anyone obsessed with the legalities is missing the entire point." The audience murmured at this. Andy swirled his drink, unbothered. "All right, let's talk security. You've argued you deserve state-funded protection even after stepping back. But critics say you want taxpayer-funded safety without taxpayer-funded duty. What's your response?" Harry leaned back, cool and detached. "Critics don't know what it's like to be hunted. Let them trade places with me for 1 week. Then we'll talk." Andy didn't flinch. "Let's move to charities. Some praise your efforts, but others point out how much of the money goes to consultants and production costs, not the cause itself. How do you respond to that? Harry scoffed. People love to complain about financial ratios when they've never raised a dollar themselves. Results speak louder than receipts. The audience shifted uneasily. Andy let the uncomfortable silence settle over them. Okay, let's bring it closer to home. Your marriage. You and Meghan have built a powerful brand together, huge interviews, Netflix, podcasts. But does that overwhelming public image ever threaten to drown out your private reality? Harry chuckled, dismissive. The only people who are overwhelmed are the ones watching from the cheap seats. The answer drew a soft, shocked gasp. Andy's brow rose slightly, but his voice stayed smooth. Some say you've burned every bridge behind you, your father, your brother, even old friends. Is there any room for self-reflection in any of that? Harry leaned in, his tone suddenly sharp. I'm not here for a therapy session. I cut ties with people who chose headlines over loyalty. That's called protecting your family. Andy let out a slow, measured breath. And yet those same people say you've turned every private grievance into public contempt. That the palace, the press, even your own family have become nothing more than characters in your story. Do you think you've become what you say you hate? Harry's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand agency for hypocrisy. I don't play their game anymore. I built my own. Andy leaned forward, his smile thinning. Even if that new game depends on a constant state of conflict to keep it interesting? Conflict finds me, Harry snapped, his patience clearly fraying. Ask the tabloids you read before breakfast. The audience reacted with a low rumble. Andy swirled his glass one last time and set it down with a definitive click. Then let's get specific. The car chase in New York. Police reports said it was exaggerated. There are inconsistencies in your memoir, timelines that don't match public records. If the facts don't line up with your story, which one moves? Harry stiffened, his voice dropping low and dangerous. You're dressing up skepticism as rigor. It's not. It's just appetite. And you, Andy said evenly, are dressing up contradiction as conscience. It's not. It's just control. The air in the room turned to ice. The audience gasped softly. For the first time all night, Harry's mask fully cracked. His jaw clenched, and his eyes burned with a cold fire. Andy leaned back, calm as ever, and the camera zoomed in even closer, sensing the storm was finally about to break. The studio lights blazed hotter, as if sensing the dramatic shift. Prince Harry sat stiffly in his chair, one leg crossed sharply. Over the other, his chin tilted up in defiance. Andy Cohen, all pretense of being a genial Bravo host gone, leaned forward with his elbows on the desk, his eyes locked onto Harry's with surgical focus. Harry, Andy began, his voice slow and laced with a newfound exhaustion. We've talked about your book, your family, your projects. But there's one thing we haven't addressed directly. Accountability. You've spoken about betrayal from your father, cruelty from your brother, racism from the institution, lies from the press. But when does any of this become about you? About your role in it all? Harry's smirk was titanium. You think this is about me, Andy? This is about a corrupt system that's finally been exposed. I had the courage to walk away when everyone else stayed silent. That's called leadership. Andy's jaw flexed, but his voice remained measured. Leadership is also about owning your mistakes, not just pointing fingers. Do you accept any responsibility for the relationships you've lost? Harry leaned forward, his arrogance spilling through every syllable. I don't lose relationships. People lose me. There's a difference. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The sheer arrogance, the smugness, it was finally too much. Andy exhaled slowly, set his cards aside, and his trademark smile vanished completely. Let me be clear, he said, his voice rising with purpose. You've spent this entire interview dismissing, sneering, and insulting. You walked onto this set thinking the world still owes you sympathy because of your title. But Harry, he said, the words landing like a gavel, you're not a prince here. You're a guest on my show. Harry blinked, truly stunned for the first time all evening. His composure snapped back a second later. I don't need this circus to validate me, he shot back, his voice cracking with fury. I've survived far worse than a late-night host trying to score points. Andy's patience evaporated. He slammed his palm flat onto the desk, the sound startling the audience into utter silence. His voice thundered, now stripped entirely of its hostly charm. Enough. Do you hear yourself? You talk about compassion but show none. You talk about truth but twist it whenever it suits you. You hide behind victimhood while cashing checks from the very spotlight you claim destroyed you. You're not the noble rebel you want the world to see. You're a spoiled, arrogant man who can't admit he might ever be wrong. Harry's face flushed a deep, furious crimson, his jaw trembling with barely contained rage. How dare you? No. Andy cut in sharply, his finger pointing across the desk. How dare you? How dare you reduce everyone else, your father, your brother, your sister-in-law, the Queen herself, to nothing but villains in your personal drama just to keep your narrative alive? You walked out of duty. Fine. But don't pretend you didn't trade it for dollar signs. Don't stand here and act like the world owes you reverence because you once wore a crown. The audience sat frozen, their jaws slack. Every camera was locked on the explosion. Harry's hand twitched at his microphone, his composure completely unraveling. He shot to his feet, his voice trembling with pure rage. This is over. I will not be humiliated like this. Andy rose too, steady and unshaken. You're right. It is over. He pointed firmly toward the curtain. Get out. The words cracked through the room like a thunderclap. The audience gasped, a mixture of shock and disbelief flooding the air. Harry ripped his microphone from his